Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the KLA Young Stockmans. So, in case you want to know what the deal was, I'm not really in trouble. These guys are going to haul. Well, they might haul me out. I don't know. But anyway, we will have a hearing today. And then also, Terry, we did send out an email on the bills that we'll be working tomorrow. Is that correct? Okay. We will actually talk about that right quick. Our plan is, after the hearing today, we will work this bill tomorrow. And we will also work on House Bill 2563. That is all the seed kind of updates. And I believe we'll, and so if you do have any amendments for those, be sure to get those lined up. And then if you did hear the Bo Weevil bill is kicked back to our committee, we have a slight, just a very slight change that needs to be made. And so that will be taken care of, and then we'll be able to run that again. So just so you're aware. So that will be tomorrow, and then Thursday we will also have a hearing on a couple of bills, and then Monday will be the last day. We will meet till turnaround, and then we will work on bills previously heard then on Monday. So with that, we will open the hearing on House Bill 2530. And Kyle, if you would give us a breakdown of what this bill is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So I'm going to start off my brief with, I guess, a brief to the brief. It'll just be a couple sentences long. You might want me to stop there, but then we have to dig in to the actual language of this bill. So if I were to summarize the two main things the bill does, one, if the label is a meatless food product, and it contains an identifiable meat term and does not contain certain qualifying language, the product will be deemed misbranded. If a food product falls under the definition of imitation, it will be deemed misbranded if in the label the word imitation does not immediately precede the name of the food being imitated. So imitation chicken would be an example of how that would work. So let's start with section 1 of the bill. It would amend the definition section of the Kansas Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. On page 3, line 38, the current definition of imitation would be amended so that it would not conflict with a new, more specific definition of imitation that's used in section 2 of the bill. At the end of the definition section, starting on page 5, line 4, new definitions would be inserted for the terms meat analog, identifiable meat term, and close proximity to the identifiable meat term. So let's go through those really fast. A meat analog would mean any food that approximates the aesthetic qualities, primarily texture, flavor, and appearance, or the chemical characteristics of any specific type of meat, meat food product, or poultry food product, but does not contain any meat, meat food product, or poultry food product. Identifiable meat term, you'll see there a list of different words. The list is not exhaustive, so if a particular term is not on the list, it might still fall underneath the umbrella identifiable meat term. So I'm looking through it right here. I don't see sirloin. So if it said tofu sirloin, the word sirloin in that instance would be an identifiable meat term. It's not listed here in the definition, but it's another term for food that contains any meat food product, poultry, or poultry food product. And then the other new term, close proximity to the identifiable meat term, means 1, immediately before or after the identifiable meat term, 2, in the same line of the label containing the identifiable meat term, 3, in the line of the label that is immediately preceding or subsequent to the line containing the identifiable meat term, or 4, within the same phrase or sentence that uses the identifiable meat term. Definitions of meat, meat food product, and poultry food product would also be inserted and would mean the same as provided in the Code of Federal Regulations. So those definitions in their entirety do not appear within the bill itself. I have listed the applicable parts of those definitions in the bill brief in the footnotes. But to quickly summarize that, for meat, we're talking about cattle, sheep, swine, or goats. And then poultry is any domesticated bird, chickens, turkeys, ducks, etc. We are not talking about fish in this bill. Tofu fish, it's not applicable here. Section 2 of the bill on page 5, line 30 begins with the phrase, "A food shall be deemed to be misbranded." And then the rest of the section is a list. So subsection C, line 33, states that a food shall be deemed to be misbranded if it is an imitation of another food, unless its label bears in type of uniform size and prominence the word imitation, and immediately thereafter, the name of the food imitated. The term imitation would mean the same as provided in the Code of Federal Regulations. Under the applicable regulation, a food is deemed to be an imitation if it is a substitute for and resembles another food, but is nutritionally inferior to that food. The term nutritionally inferior is described in that federal regulation to mean a substitute that contains less protein or potassium or a lesser amount of any essential vitamin or mineral than is contained in the food being substituted. So again, that's a term that's not listed, described in the bill itself. It's in the federal regulation, and I included that language in the footnotes of the brief. Subsection M, which is on page 7, line 8, would state that a food would be deemed misbranded if it is a meat analog and 1, its labeling utilizes an identifiable meat term, and 2, the labeling does not have a disclaimer in the same font, style, and size in close proximity to the identifiable meat term, stating one of the following. A, this product does not contain meat. B, meatless. C, meat-free. And then vegan, veggie, vegetarian, or vegetable. The provisions of subsection M would not apply to a menu or a menu board or to food that falls under subsection C's definition of imitation and complies with the provision of that subsection. So you wouldn't have a situation where there's a food that falls underneath that term imitation and would be required to say veggie imitation tofu. It wouldn't have to comply with both of those provisions, just the one. And then the final paragraph of section 2, starting on page 7, line 16, would contain a severability clause stating that if any provisions of section 2 is held to be invalid or unconstitutional, it would be conclusively presumed that the legislature would have enacted the remainder of the section without such invalid or unconstitutional provision. And then I want to give a quick word about penalties. These provisions are contained in other parts of the Kansas Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Again, they are not in the bill itself, but they would be applicable. So misbranding food or processing, storing, or distributing any misbranded food is prohibited under the Act. The Secretary of Agriculture can impose a civil penalty in an amount not more than $1,000 per violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In the case of a continuing violation, each day such violation continues shall be deemed a separate violation. Such civil penalty may be assessed in addition to any other penalty provided by law. And any person who recklessly or intentionally violates the provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act shall be guilty of a Class A non-person misdemeanor. And so that's up to a year in jail and a maximum fine of $2,500. House Bill 2530 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
All right, Kyle, any questions? Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, you mentioned that the term nutritionally inferior is a reference to a different regulation. Is that correct? I guess it seems almost certainly likely that two foods could actually be nutritionally inferior to each other based on the definition of nutritionally inferior because it's so broad. Isn't that correct? It's not really relevant to the bill. It just seems like a weird term.
Well, off the top of my head, I don't have a immediate response to that question. It's a very large definition in federal law, so I haven't quite looked through all of that language with that thought in mind.
Okay, yeah, it just seems like a weird term because maybe food A has less protein and then food B has less potassium, but for them to both then be defined as nutritionally inferior to each other seems weird, but okay, thank you.
Questions? Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Kyle. We'll now go to proponents, and first up, Aaron Popelka from the Kansas Livestock Association. On the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be back with you again. Seems like I was just here yesterday. But yeah, I'm Aaron Popelka. I'm Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs with the Kansas Livestock Association. And as the chairman noted today, I brought my posse with me. I don't think they're here to round up anybody, but I definitely encourage you all, especially if you have some young folks back here that are in your district, say hello, get to know them. I got to spend some time with them this morning. We're helping teach them about public policy, the legislature, today and tomorrow, which will culminate in our legislative meeting tomorrow evening, which you're all invited to. So happy to have those folks here and encourage you to get to know them. Yes, they are the Young Stockman's Academy. It's our leadership group that we bring to the Capitol every year. They're kind of the next up-and-coming generation in the livestock industry. So to the issue at hand on the bill, KLA obviously is a strong proponent of House Bill 2530. We think that food should be labeled accurately, and in particular, what's become known as fake meat should have accurate labels on their products. And I want to make something very clear. You know, our outfit is very free market oriented outfit. We think if you have a product and you can sell it, go ahead. Let's get in the market and compete. I think the one thing that we're concerned about here is that we have, as you'll see as I get into my testimony, a product that's trying to be a competitor, but is playing essentially outside the rules. And I say outside the rules, they really don't have rules. That's what we're asking you to put on them. Whereas the meat industry, as I'll get into, we have to play within a very defined set of rules from the federal government that we have to follow on labels. I'm guessing probably a lot of you, if you've been to the store prior to just a few years ago, were aware of some of these products. They really didn't reach an elevated level until just a few years ago. And it's really a few companies, in particular Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, that started developing these type of protein plant products, if you will, that tried to imitate meat products. And in doing so, when you look at some of the labels that they put on these things, are very deceptive. And it's not just that they're trying, part of it is they're trying to sell it, but part of it is they're trying to sell it at the expense and confusion of consumers. And I'm going to read some quotes here from the chief executive officers of the two companies that I mentioned. And I think it'll become very clear why there's a need for some level of rules in this space. So the first quote is from Mr. Ethan Brown from Beyond Meat, and he says, "It's about separating meat from animals. When you think of meat in terms of composition, it's 5 things: amino acids, lipids, trace minerals, vitamins, and water. None of that is exclusive to animals." We move on to the CEO of Impossible Meat, and he says, "We've defined meat too narrowly." And then they go on to say things like, you know, that meat is by far the most destructive technology on Earth today, or I should say animal life animal food industry. I've got an example attached to my testimony of some of the false information they put on their website about greenhouse gas emissions. I followed it up with some links from the EPA to show that those are clearly erroneous. But I think when it gets to the heart of it, when it really comes clear what these companies are trying to do, Mr. Pat Brown, as CEO of Impossible Foods, says, we, Impossible Foods, have zero interest really in vegetarian customers. In fact, I'm not being ironic. Every time we sell a burger to a vegan or a vegetarian, it's actually complete waste in terms of our mission. He's also stated the whole point of our product is not to be successful as a new product, but to be successful at the expense of the incumbent industry. I think that says it all right there. So when I'm going to show you some of the labels from these companies, but keep in mind the statements, and I link these, so in your PDF that you've been provided, you can go click on these, you can read them. They're out there in the public sphere. So let's go ahead, attach to the testimony. I provided you Exhibit 2 here. I got this at a Topeka grocery store. It's a package of Beyond Meat. There's a steer there with a cape. It says Beyond Meat, Beyond Beef Crumbles, Beefy. It looks like, a picture there of what appears to be hamburger, and down clear at the bottom next to the weight is a little deal that says plant-based crumbles. And I'll get into a minute about why that particular label is just misleading. So not only are they putting misleading terms on the packages, but when you look at the nutritional quality, the next exhibit is a study done by the Beef Checkoff. And it looked at how does beef compare to some of these different products. I'll tell you that the pea-based protein is beyond, and the soy-based is impossible. And you'll see that there are nutritional inferiorities, particularly when you're looking at 93% lean and the protein content in some of these products. So how are consumers viewing these labels? I think that's important, because as we look at the instances when labels are necessary and when government can do that, are they deceiving consumers? And so one of the things our national affiliate, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, did was a survey of consumers, and Exhibit 4 shows you that we did a quantitative study of over 1,800 respondents, okay? And if you look at the next page of that exhibit, it gives you a breakdown of when folks saw plant-based beef, what they think it meant. And then the next page, it breaks out a little more the products themselves, Impossible and Beyond. And what comes to light there is that when you add up folks who think it's meat, contains meat, or some animal product, eggs, cheese, etc., it's over 59%. If you cut out the animal products, it's over a third. Statistically speaking, that is very significant consumer confusion. And it's all because of those labels, I think, that you've seen. The other thing I'll note is on Exhibit 5 that I think has become a more recent phenomenon, and this was taken by a member in Junction City at a grocery store. You'll see there it says 100% all beef, and right below it, it's Beyond Burger. So this product, it's one thing, if these labels were just being put in like your freezer aisles. It's one thing when it's being put in the meat case right next to ground beef and other meat cuts and easily mistaken by consumers. And so I want to get into now maybe a little bit about what the bill does. I think the revisor did an excellent job, but I want to answer maybe a few questions that came up and maybe simplify what the bill does a little bit. So we already have a Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act in Kansas. The Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act allows states to do that. So we have, not all states have this, but we have one, so it's very easy to amend this into to be a part of what's already a prohibition on misbranding certain foods. One of the differences, so if you were here in 2020 when we did this bill, you'll notice that there's been a few changes. And this comes from, we've worked with some of the companies that want to offer this. Again, getting back to, we're not trying to tell anybody they can't sell product. We're not telling anybody they can't name a product how they want. But we've added flexibility in where the disclaimers can be located on the package and the number of disclaimers. We've added meatless, meat-free, vegan, veggie, vegetarian, and vegetable. One of the things you won't see in there, I think that was a point of contention, was the words plant-based. And that goes back to that survey I showed you in the exhibits that specifically asked about that term plant-based. And I think that's something that we'd stand on. We want to be data-driven, and the data shows that that's a confusing term. And so we would oppose adding that term to the disclaimers in this bill. The question, I think, came up on imitation. And so the question was about nutritionally inferior. So the reason imitation is in this bill is one of the complaints of the companies is, well, we don't want different states having different standards. We want one standard. Imitation is a federal standard, and that's the cross-reference. And so when it speaks of nutritionally inferior, it speaks of a food and then a food that's trying to replicate another food. So that's the context that's used in. And think about it, imitation crab meat. We've probably all heard of that. I know this will be a shocker to some of you, but it's not crab meat. That's what we're getting at here. If they want to use a standard that's accessible to them at the federal level and is governed by the FDA, they could easily put imitation on these products. The thing is, they don't want to because deception sells product. The other thing I'll mention that's in my written testimony, I touched on this a little bit. So the Federal Meat Inspection Act regulates meat labels. If a meat processor wants to do a new label, and I've linked to the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service that inspects meat products, if you want to change a label, you have to actually go and ask USDA, does this label follow the regulations? And there's a whole list of regulations that, with the link that I provided, you can go look at. Meat labels are highly regulated, and we have to ask permission. These companies that are operating in this plant protein space don't have to follow those rules. FDA is really a complaint-based driven system, unless they develop a standard of identity, which they've indicated. They came out with a list of priorities recently. This is not one of them. And so at this point, we need some help from the state. The other thing I want to touch on before I wrap up is, I think we'll probably hear from some opponents that, this is just going to get us into a lawsuit. Can I give you a guarantee that this will not spawn or create a lawsuit? No. I mean, anybody can file a lawsuit. What I can tell you is we're not the first state to do this. In fact, 2 of our neighbors have done this. One neighbor did it poorly. Missouri did it in a way that banned the use of terms and prohibited the use of terms and applied it to cell-cultured meat. Those were 2 things they can't do, and there's a reason for that. You can't do cell-cultured meat because that is actual meat, even though it's not grown in the traditional sense. It's actual meat, and it's regulated by USDA. USDA preempts states from regulating meat products. The second reason Missouri got themselves in trouble is they banned speech. There's a difference between individual speech, which has a higher scrutiny test at a constitutional level, and commercial speech. But even commercial speech, you can't just ban speech. However, you can, and I attached a memo from a colleague of mine back in 2020 in regard to some of the legal precedent on this, and I'll just read a piece of that. Basically, that commercial speech, the test is, are adequately protected as long as disclosure requirements are reasonably related to the state's interest in preventing deception of consumers. So that's the standard in commercial speech. I think we've walked this line very tightly. It's not in our interest to have a law that's going to be struck down. So when you look at another state, Oklahoma, they followed a model not exactly like ours, because I don't know that they have a Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act like we did. But theirs is more similar to our bill. They were sued, but they survived an initial injunction from one of the companies. In fact, the judge says, we think it's more than likely the state's law will survive, and it actually has gone into effect. Now, the other companies have appealed to the 10th Circuit, and we're waiting for that. But I think that's an example of when these things are written right, they have the ability to survive. The other thing, and this is just for your information, a lot of the stuff that's perpetuated by these companies is that, you know, animals are destroying the planet, beef's evil. And I've provided some stuff here. Some of this provided from the beef checkoff, which producers pay into to develop research to combat some of this misinformation about how beef has improved its greenhouse gas footprint over the years. And in fact, there's a statistic there from 1961 until 2019. We've decreased the carbon emissions of beef per pound by 40.3%. I think that's a pretty good success story. And we've also increased productivity by 36% since 1975. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, questions for Mr. Popelka? Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron, thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Chairman, if it pleases you, I would like to welcome the Young Stockmen's group here. I'm an alumni of that group back in 1991, I believe it was, and I found that to be a very beneficial program. I know it's a much improved program today than what it was back then. If memory serves me correctly, I think we were in Topeka 2 or 3 days, 2 days, and went and toured IBP and Emporia, and that was kind of the end of it. But it was very beneficial, and I did learn things. So welcome to Ag Committee. My question, and I think you kind of got to it in your testimony, but do you see a time when the feds are going to address this? Because everything is traded interstate. You know, we're not going to have manufacturers that sell just in the state of Kansas. So why are they going to, how is a manufacturer, and I don't really care if they survive or not. I mean, if people want to eat that stuff, that's fine. That's a choice, as long as it's properly labeled. This issue is long overdue.
Yeah.
We should have done something about this 5 years ago. I'm glad we're doing something today. But at what point are the feds going to do something?
I think that's a good question, and I'd agree. I think we'd love the feds to do something. Unfortunately, and this isn't a partisan statement, the last administration dragged their feet on it. This administration's dragging their feet on it. Every time FDA comes out with, this is the things we're going to work on, this isn't on the list. And in fact, the way they get to this is standards of identity. They've done standards of identity in milk, and then they just haven't followed up on enforcement. And so I think it's been a frustration in our industry, and so that's why we're here, because the way the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act is put together, unlike the Meat Inspection Act, states can do something, and our hope is that enough states say something that it gets the federal government to get to action. And again, that's why we allowed lots of options here. We don't necessarily want to shut anybody down. And in particular, I think the imitation is a good way, if these companies want to have a national label.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Popelka, you referenced the Federal Inspection Act. What does real meat have to go through in the process to acquire a label? And if it's not entirely correct, then what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to profess to be an expert. If you go to the link I showed you, there's a whole list of things that have to be on the label. It specifically lays out, here's what misbranding is. It requires things like a foodborne illness warning for ground beef. That may become an issue in another bill. But so as a plant, you have to go through and comply with all those regulations that specifically lay out how your label is supposed to be built. And then before you make a new claim, you have to submit it to USDA, and they get to say yes or no. And then if you don't follow it, there's penalties, which I'm off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what all the penalties were, but certainly federal government pulling authorization for your label would be on the list.
Do the meat analogs have to go through the same process?
No, they're regulated in the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. Again, that's a complaint-based system. There's some general rules within FDA, but nothing speaks right now specifically to how they label these plant protein products, because FDA does it through standards of identity, and they haven't created one yet, because these are fairly recent developments in the food industry.
Thank you.
Other questions? What, even though you're a proponent, I know some opponents have said, this creates a new label. What what would the cost of a label be? And I assume would it be a Kansas-specific label that wouldn't be used in the other states, or do you, I mean, and I guess that, and maybe talk about some of the conversations leading up to where we are today from your standpoint as far as, you know, some of the changes and as that continues to kind of be a sticking point in all this is that label.
So I don't know there'd be a Kansas-specific label. What we've tried to do is build enough flexibility with various disclaimers. That's why we expanded the list so that companies that are out there who are trying to sell a competing protein product but aren't trying to deceive consumers can do that. And in fact, some of the companies that we visited with through the summer, we went to their website, went through some of their things, and I think most of the what I'd call legitimate companies under the bill we have here, they like to use things like meatless or meat-free or vegan or vegetarian, and they put them fairly close proximity. So that's another change in the bill from past years, before we had right before or after. So they're in close proximity. So I'd envision very few companies actually having to change their existing labels, looking at the ones that are out there.
All righty. Representative Newland, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is more just a comment that I have, you know, for the production of these products. And I have to revert back to the prayer that we heard before session today. And it's the truth in the matter and how we present any product or any principle. And so that's a statement I just make, you know, that that's all we want is truth in the label and in the product.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Aaron. Did I hear in your conversation or in your statement that the 10th Circuit Court is going to make a ruling with Oklahoma?
Yeah, so the district court judge had said that the law was more than likely to survive on the merits and did not give an injunction to the companies that was essentially the trade group for these companies that sued. And he said the Oklahoma law could proceed, and it's currently in effect. They appealed that injunction then to the 10th Circuit, and so they're awaiting a decision. So I think we'll probably have some more clarity on what happens there once that opinion happens. I'm not sure when that happens, but I think based on the research we've done, I'm fairly confident that this is enough like Oklahoma's we'd survive.
Okay. Do you know when that opinion's going to come down at all?
No, I rarely try to double guess the judge's opinion dates.
Thank you.
Representative Shue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Aaron, would you say it's probably an accurate statement that over the last 2 years since the last time we heard this bill, kind of both sides have softened a little bit? It seems like this is significantly less onerous from a labeling standpoint than the bill we saw 2 years ago. It sounds like their labels are already kind of mostly complying anyways. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
I'd say yes. I think that's kind of the art of compromise, right? Doesn't do us any good to continue to have a space where there's no rules, and they obviously want to quit probably coming having to deal with this. So we tried to accommodate as much as we can. And I'd say a lot of labels are currently doing the right thing, but there's a number, and one, obviously I've attached one to the testimony that's not going to be in compliance. And those are the ones that we're trying to get at.
If I recall correctly, that one was the same one that we saw 2 years ago, though, so that might have already changed as well.
It might have, but I think I was in the store the other day and saw something pretty similar to it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Okay, I think you're okay, unless you have anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we also have written testimony from members of the Ag Alliance you'll find in your packet. And also, we're going to pause for just a moment. Our conferee is in between committees, and so testify in one committee, so he just said he's on his way. So I said we would just stand by here for just a moment. So we're at ease for right now. since we have a microphone up there while we're waiting, could the young stockmen come and introduce themselves while Mr. Stafford catches his breath? So come to the microphone so they can be into the record that they are in attendance. Thank you. Don't turn around. Come up.
Hi, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Maggie Breakville, and I'm from Manhattan.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Michael Olson from Oldsburg.
Morning, members and Mr. Chair. I'm Nate Smith, and I'm from Pratt, Kansas. Thank you.
Hello, all. Cece Blythe. I'm from White City, Kansas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelby Schultz, and I'm from El Dorado, Kansas.
Hello, Mr. Chair and everyone. I'm Dylan Hamilton, and I'm from Sublette, Kansas.
Hello, Mr. Chair and everyone. I'm Blaze Fountain. I'm from McPherson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Kieran. I'm from Scott City, Kansas.
Howdy, I'm Spencer Paul. I'm from Manhattan, Kansas.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Ethan Wilkie from Scott City, Kansas.
Hello, everyone. I'm Grant Glazier, and I'm from Marion, Kansas.
Hello, all. I'm Issa Summer, and I'm from Cimarron, Kansas.
Hello, Peyton Barrett from Grantville, Kansas.
Hello, all. I'm Brandon Frederick, and I'm from Hutchinson, Kansas.
Good afternoon. Mitch Stewart, Onega, Kansas.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christina Zerger from Cheney.
Hello, all. David Allen from Tribune, Kansas.
Good afternoon. Tyler Wells, Great Bend.
Good afternoon. I'm Dakota Ferguson from Williamsburg, Kansas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and all members of the committee. My name is Mary Kate Crouch, and I'm from Scott City, Kansas.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Yes, Representative Minix.
Mr. Chairman, I am so tickled to welcome 3 members from my home county that belong to this illustrious group, and thank you.
I think we will now proceed. Again, now the opponents, and we welcome Eric Stafford, who is running all over the building for the Kansas Chamber. So, Mr. Stafford, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber. Yeah, have some tort reform bills. You know, it'd be nice if the committees were like 1 floor apart, but it's up on 5, so, in judiciary. So I've been a lobbyist since 2005, and I think this is my first time before the House or Senate Ag Committee. It was a heck of a run, but I think it's over and probably have checked all the boxes now. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to House Bill 2530 on the day that Mr. Propelka has his livestock group here at the Capitol. That's always awesome. And we're not the bad guys. But no, you know, we have producer members and food manufacturing members that are in opposition to this from a regulatory climate standpoint. And just putting it shortly, this bill would put restrictions in place that would require our members to print labels specific for the state of Kansas. There are states, I think 15 or so states, that have passed some form of labeling requirement that our folks took kind of the best practices of those states and presented it in the fall to the proponents of the bill and basically told, like, no, we can't do it. I think the big hang-up is the words plant-based. They feel that that's misleading. That was stated in the testimony today, and our members firmly disagree. The comments that were set out at the beginning, too, that I was able to hear before I left and going through the bill, is that there is a reference to federal laws and guidance and labeling requirements at the federal level. And historically, the focus has been getting the federal government to establish a uniform set of standards, so we don't have Kansas doing one thing and Georgia and Wisconsin doing another, and leaving Tyson and Kellogg's and whoever else out there with different rules to follow and the costs associated with manufacturing different labels. Yeah, I think that is the the genesis of our testimony, I mean, basically, we're looking at whether it's your role today to protect consumers from themselves and whether they're buying products that are misleading. I think I know going to the grocery store what is acceptable, what am I looking at in terms of meat here. I think when I was on a call with one of our members, he said, do we need to clarify, and I might have even put it in my, I did put it in my written comments, do we need to clarify that zebra cakes don't contain zebra meat? Does hamburger contain ham? I think that we know that it's beef, but there are terms that are used that are not misleading, that are accepted among consumers, and that this bill creates more problems for the businesses and industry impacted than the benefits to the consumers who are making those decisions to purchase these products as alternatives to meat today. So with that, happy to answer any questions from the committee, and appreciate you accommodating us, and I'm sorry for being back and forth.
Questions for Mr. Stafford. Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you saying that you would not have any problem with the bill, or at least be neutral if it weren't for the plant-based issue, if they were allowed to label it as being plant-based?
I think that the language that was previously presented that was rejected, we've been told is non-starter. So we're beyond the point of negotiations is where I'm at today.
I mean, is there any way that the bill could be reworded to get your support, or are you just against any labeling laws or requirements?
I think that is the question for the proponents, not the opponents.
Other questions? Seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Thompson.
Well, welcome to the Kansas House Ag Committee. You know, agriculture is the largest industry in the state, so it's nice that the chamber made an appearance.
Absolutely.
So you're telling me, so I'm totally clear on this, you're telling me they still like that level of deception. They can't come out on their labeling and say, this is not meat.
I think our members just philosophically disagree that the products labeled as are today are not deceiving.
I hope our consumers understand. Thank you.
I mean, I've never been confused. I know what I'm buying.
Other questions? Seeing none?
Okay, thank you.
Come back anytime.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're always welcome. I think there's a couple of issues, though, that maybe we could, I'll go there. Also, written testimony opponents to Sam McRoberts from the Kansas Justice League, Scott Snyder, Kansas Hospitality and Restaurant Association, and Nicole, Negaweli from the Plant-Based Food Association. And and then we have neutral testimony also written from Kenny Titus from Kansas Department of Agriculture. Anyone here that we missed to testify either as a proponent, opponent, or neutral that we did not have on our agenda, or anyone online? Hearing none or seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2530. Committee, tomorrow we will discuss and act on bills previously heard. There's 3 of them. Again, House Bill 2530, that is the bill we just heard. House Bill 2559, that slight change to the Boll Weevil Act. And then House Bill 2563, dealing with the seeds treated with certain substances, and that we heard earlier this week. And then we will also have a hearing on Thursday on a couple of veterinary bills, and then Friday we will not meet, but Monday we will, there's still one more bill we may end up hearing on Monday, and then trying to work it right away, because Monday will be the last day before we go on the floor for turnaround. So anything else for the good of the committee? Again, thank you, the young leaders. We hope to see you tomorrow night and enjoy a great steak. So with that, we are adjourned.